What if one of the most powerful stories ever told about Jesus is not wrong, but incomplete? For nearly 2,000 years, billions of people have believed they understood who Jesus was and why he came. The familiar story says he came to save humanity from sin, to die so the world could be forgiven. But hidden in the shadows of early Christianity was another group who heard his message very differently. They were called the Gnostics, some of the earliest mystical Christians, and they believed Jesus was not primarily a redeemer of sin, but something far more unsettling and far more profound. To them, Jesus was a revealer of truth, not a figure sent to repair the world, but a teacher sent to wake humanity up. Because in the Gnostic view, the real problem was not sin in the way most people imagine. The real problem was ignorance. According to their ancient teachings, the world we experience every day may not be the ultimate reality at all. It may be a kind of spiritual prison, a system that keeps human beings focused on matter while forgetting the hidden flame within them. And if that idea feels uncomfortable, that is exactly why it survived only in fragments, buried in texts that were hidden, banned, or lost for centuries. Yet some of those writings still exist today. In ancient works like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, we find a very different portrait of Jesus emerging from the pages. A teacher who speaks in riddles about self-knowledge, a guide who points inward instead of outward, a voice that suggests the kingdom of God is not something waiting in the sky, but something hidden within human consciousness itself. These texts do not simply add small details to the story you know. They reshape the entire meaning of his mission. And once you begin to see Jesus through this lens, the story starts to feel less like a familiar religious tale and more like a quiet invitation. An invitation to question what most people never question, and to look for a truth that may have been hiding in plain sight the entire time. If you follow this thread carefully, you may begin to understand why some early Christians believed Jesus came not to save the world, but to wake a few people up from it. Before moving deeper into the story of Jesus through the Gnostic lens, it helps to pause for a moment and ask a quieter question that history rarely encourages people to ask. Who were the Gnostics really? The term comes from the ancient Greek word gnosis, which simply means knowledge, but not the kind of knowledge people use to pass exams, memorize facts, or build something practical like a bookshelf. Gnosis refers to something far more intimate and unsettling. It is the kind of knowing that happens inside a person when something suddenly becomes clear deep inside their being, a recognition rather than a belief, a remembering rather than a lesson. For the Gnostics, this inner knowing was not just helpful or inspiring, it was everything. They believed that true salvation did not come from belonging to an institution, following a list of rules, or performing rituals perfectly. It came from awakening to a truth that was already hidden within the human soul. And this is where their view of reality becomes startling, because at the center of Gnostic thought is an idea that feels almost dangerous the first time you hear it. The world, as we normally experience it, may not be what it appears to be. In fact, the Gnostics suggested something far stranger. They believed that the material world itself might be a kind of trap. According to their cosmology, the physical universe was not created directly by the highest divine source. And this is the point where the story stops feeling symbolic and starts feeling unsettling. Instead, it was shaped by a lesser being they called the demiurge. This figure was not a villain in the dramatic sense, but it was flawed, limited, and unaware of the greater divine reality beyond itself. In creating the material world, the demiurge unknowingly fashioned a system that held fragments of divine light captive, and according to the Gnostics, those fragments are us. Those fragments, according to Gnostic teaching, are what we call human souls. In this view, every person walking through the world carries within them a spark that does not truly belong here. The body itself was not considered evil. The Gnostics did not teach hatred of the physical world, but they saw the body as something like a container, a temporary structure that can easily distract the soul from remembering what it really is. Our senses pull our attention outward. Desires tie consciousness to matter. Life becomes a constant movement toward things that feel urgent but never fully satisfying. And slowly, quietly, people forget that something far greater lives inside them. The Gnostics believed that the purpose of spiritual life was not to perfect the body or repair the world of matter. Their goal was something more radical. It was to awaken the hidden light within the human being and reconnect with the true source of all light, the unknowable divine reality beyond the visible universe. And it is precisely here that the figure of Jesus enters the story in a way that feels both familiar and completely different at the same time. In the Gnostic imagination, Jesus was not simply a moral teacher, and not only the Son of God in the traditional sense. He was something closer to a messenger from beyond the system, a revealer, a guide sent to remind humanity of something it had forgotten. According to this view, Jesus did not come primarily to repair the world or to make the prison more comfortable. He came to wake people up. Because if the Gnostics were even partly right, the real tragedy of human life is not moral failure. It is spiritual amnesia. It is forgetting who we are. And the moment a person begins to remember, even slightly, the entire structure of reality begins to look different. If the Gnostics were right about the nature of the world, then the role of Jesus begins to look very different from the image most people grew up with. In their writings, Jesus is not simply a figure who came to forgive humanity's sins or establish a new religious structure. He appears more like a guide, walking quietly through a world of sleepers, offering small keys to those who are ready to wake up. In many Gnostic texts, especially in writings like the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus speaks in a way that feels mysterious, almost like someone leaving clues rather than delivering commandments. His words often sound simple at first, but the deeper you listen, the more they seem to point inward rather than outward. One of the most striking lines attributed to him in that text says, "When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the children of the living Father." At first glance, this might sound like a poetic phrase, but to the Gnostics, it carried an enormous meaning. Knowing yourself was not about personality, preferences, or identity in the everyday sense. It meant discovering the hidden spark within you that did not originate in this world. It meant recognizing that the deepest part of you is connected to the same divine source that stands beyond the universe itself. In this way, the teachings of Jesus were not instructions about how to behave. They were turned toward the inner life. The transformation he spoke about was not primarily moral, it was awakening. For the Gnostics, Jesus was not building a system of dependence. He was pointing people back toward a truth they could only recognize for themselves. That moment of recognition changed everything. It was like remembering a home the soul had never truly forgotten. Because of this, many of the miracles associated with Jesus take on a different meaning in Gnostic interpretation. Instead of being seen only as supernatural displays of power over nature, they begin to look like symbolic demonstrations of spiritual transformation. When Jesus heals the blind, the story can be read not just as a physical event, but as a picture of inner sight being restored. A person who once could not see truth suddenly begins to see clearly. When he walks on water, the image suggests something even more profound. Water often symbolizes the chaotic, shifting surface of the material world. To walk upon it implies a kind of mastery over the forces that usually dominate human life. In this sense, the miracle becomes less about suspending the laws of physics and more about revealing what consciousness can become when it is no longer trapped by the illusions of matter. Even some of the more mysterious sayings attributed to Jesus begin to make sense within this framework. In one passage from the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says something unusual. "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become that person, and the hidden things will be revealed to him." The language sounds strange to modern ears, but the meaning becomes clearer when seen symbolically. To drink from his mouth is not about a physical act. It suggests absorbing wisdom so deeply that it becomes part of one's own being. In that moment, the separation between teacher and student dissolves. The person who truly understands the teaching becomes transformed by it. And once that transformation begins, things that were once hidden start to reveal themselves naturally. Reality looks different. The world no longer appears as a fixed structure, but as something layered with meanings that most people never notice. In this way, the teachings of Jesus in Gnostic literature function almost like a mirror. They do not simply explain the universe. They invite the listener to recognize something buried beneath the surface of their own being. And for the Gnostics, that recognition was the beginning of liberation. Because once a person starts to see the divine spark within themselves, the entire system that once held them begins to lose its power. The prison walls do not disappear instantly, but they are no longer invisible. If we follow this thread a little further, even the most familiar moments in the story of Jesus begin to look different through the Gnostic lens. Scenes that many people have heard since childhood start to carry another layer of meaning, almost like symbols pointing towards something happening inside the human soul. Take the moment in the Garden of Gethsemane. The image is vivid and emotional. Jesus praying in the darkness, overwhelmed, asking that the cup might pass from him. For many readers, this moment represents suffering before sacrifice. But some Gnostic interpretations suggest something deeper unfolding beneath the surface of the scene. In their view, the cup could symbolize the weight of the material world itself, the dense reality shaped by the demiurge that every human consciousness must pass through. When Jesus says, "Let this cup pass from me," the words reflect the tension between the spirit and the world it finds itself inside. Yet the next words change the tone completely. "Not my will, but yours be done." In the Gnostic imagination, this is not submission to the system of the world. It is alignment with the higher divine source beyond it. It is the moment the revealer accepts the role of helping humanity remember, even if the world itself does not understand what is happening. And then there is another quiet detail in that scene that Gnostics often notice. The disciples fall asleep. Again and again, they cannot stay awake. On the surface, it looks like a simple human weakness, but symbolically, it becomes something else. Sleep becomes a metaphor for the state of humanity itself. People move through life as if dreaming, absorbed in the routines and pressures of the physical world, rarely stopping to ask deeper questions about who they are or where consciousness truly comes from. When Jesus asked them, "Could you not watch with me for 1 hour?" the question feels strangely timeless. It echoes beyond that garden into every generation that hears the story. Awakening is difficult. Even when truth stands right in front of us, the pull of the material world is powerful enough to make most people turn away or fall back asleep. And then comes one of the most controversial figures in the entire narrative, Judas. In the traditional story, he is remembered as the betrayer, the one who delivered Jesus to his enemies. But the Gnostic text, known as the Gospel of Judas, presents a radically different perspective. In that writing, Judas is not the villain at all. He is the only disciple who truly understands what Jesus is trying to accomplish. According to that text, Jesus tells Judas something astonishing. "You will sacrifice the man that clothes me." The words suggest that the physical body of Jesus is only a garment. a temporary form that covers something greater. In this interpretation, Judas does not betray Jesus. He helps release him from the physical prison that the body represents. It is a deeply symbolic idea, one that transforms the meaning of the story entirely. When the narrative moves to the Last Supper, the symbolism continues. In Orthodox Christianity, the bread and wine become the foundation of the Eucharist, representing the body and blood of Christ given for the forgiveness of sins. But Gnostic writings approach this moment from another angle. The bread and wine become symbols of spiritual nourishment. They represent the knowledge that Jesus is sharing with his followers. To partake of them is not merely to participate in a ritual, it is to absorb the wisdom that awakens what was sleeping within them. The Gospel of Philip even suggests that these elements point towards something deeper than literal sacrifice. They symbolize the union of spiritual understanding and inner transformation. The teaching echoes the mysterious saying found again in the Gospel of Thomas: "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and hidden things will be revealed." The focus is not on remembering a death, but on awakening to a truth. From this perspective, even the crucifixion itself takes on a new dimension. For many Christians, it stands as the central moment of redemption, the sacrifice that restores humanity. But some Gnostic writings, such as the Great Treatise of the Great Seth, suggest that what happened on the cross was not exactly what it appeared to be. One passage claims that it was another who suffered physically, while the true spiritual essence of Jesus remained untouched. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the message points toward the same idea. The divine spark cannot be destroyed by the material world. Even death cannot reach it. And this leads to one of the most striking ideas in Gnostic teaching about resurrection. In traditional belief, resurrection is something that happens after death, a miracle waiting at the end of time. But in Gnostic thought, resurrection is something that must happen while a person is still alive. The treatise on the resurrection expresses this idea boldly, suggesting that it may be more accurate to say, the world itself is the illusion rather than resurrection. In other words, awakening to the divine nature within is the real rising. The Gospel of Philip takes the idea even further, saying that those who expect resurrection only after death are mistaken. If a person does not undergo that inner rising while living, nothing changes when the body dies. The transformation must happen now, in the present moment. And this is where the Gnostic story quietly turns toward the listener. Because if resurrection is awakening, then the question is no longer only about Jesus. It becomes personal. It becomes immediate. The story begins to feel less like a distant religious event and more like a mirror placed gently in front of the human soul. The invitation is subtle but powerful: to wake up, to remember, and to discover whether the divine spark that ancient texts whispered about might already be burning quietly inside you. Seen through the Gnostic lens, the story of Jesus begins to feel less like a simple variation of a familiar tale and more like a quiet reimagining of what the story may have always been pointing toward. Instead of centering only on sin and atonement, the focus gently shifts toward awakening, liberation, and the rediscovery of something already alive within the human soul. In this view, Jesus does not appear primarily as someone who came to repair a broken world, but as a guide who reminded people that their deepest identity was never limited to the world they see around them. The ancient Gnostic writings suggest that beneath the surface of ordinary life, there may exist a deeper layer of meaning waiting to be recognized, a hidden current of truth that has always been present for those who feel drawn to look inward. Whether you fully align with the Gnostic perspective or simply explore it with curiosity, these texts offer a quiet invitation to consider the possibility that spiritual insight does not always arrive through institutions or external authority, but sometimes emerges through a more personal awakening that unfolds within the heart of each individual. Perhaps this is why these ancient ideas continue to resonate across centuries, because they speak not in the language of arguments, but in the language of recognition. And if something in this story stirred a sense of familiarity inside you, even in a subtle way, that feeling itself may be meaningful. It may simply mean that the questions explored here are part of a larger journey that many people quietly find themselves walking. In the end, the Gnostic story of Jesus does not force a conclusion or demand agreement. It simply leaves a door open, a possibility that the kingdom of God the texts speak about may not be far away at all, but closer than most people ever imagine, quietly waiting to be discovered within the depths of human awareness. And sometimes, the moment a person begins to wonder about that possibility is the same moment another layer of the story begins to unfold. As I sit with these ancient ideas and the strange beauty of the Gnostic story of Jesus, I cannot help but feel that the real power of this perspective is not in proving anything, but in opening a quiet space inside the mind. It feels less like being given a final answer and more like being handed a small lantern in a dark place, a light that reveals just enough for the next step of the journey. When you hear these interpretations of the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, or the mysterious writings that speak about awakening and the divine spark within, something subtle begins to shift. Not a loud certainty, but a quiet question that echoes inside. What if the story was always meant to be experienced rather than simply believed? And what if the deeper meaning of these teachings was not hidden in distant history, but waiting to be recognized in the lives we are living right now? I am curious what part of this journey spoke to you the most. Was it the idea that the world might be more mysterious than it first appears? The thought that Jesus may have come as a revealer of inner truth? Or the possibility that awakening is something that happens quietly within the human soul? Everyone hears these stories a little differently, and sometimes the most interesting insights appear in the reflections people share with each other. So, if something in this video stayed with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. You can share a simple line in the comments, maybe something like "the kingdom is within," or just describe the moment in the story that resonated with you the most. If this exploration into hidden wisdom stirred your curiosity or gave you something new to reflect on, you can also show your support by leaving a like and subscribing so more people can discover these conversations as well. Thank you for taking this journey, for listening with an open mind, and for being part of a growing circle of people who are willing to explore questions that history once tried to keep hidden.